All right, Acts chapter 21, and we're going to pick up at verse 27 where we left off last week. And if you were with us in our journey, so not only is today Palm Sunday, which is a great and wonderful time where we remember Jesus triumphantly entering into Jerusalem and coming in, being just, praised, people calling out Hosanna, waving the palm branches. It was a glorious time. And I was thinking about that as I was preparing for this week, as we look at the contrast between what happened with Jesus and what's going on here with Paul. Right? And Paul's journey has been extremely different. Paul's journey has been one where he felt the Lord calling him while he was in Greece. And he knew he had to go to Jerusalem, but he also knew, much like Jesus, that it was not going to end well. And instead, so we read about Paul, who very slowly makes his way back up through Macedonia, back through the province of Asia, and very slowly makes it, but he eventually arrives, and we read about that last week, where Paul arrives in Jerusalem. Things seem to be going well at first, and he's trying to show the Jews that, in fact, he is not against the law. And he's going through the purification rite to have himself deemed pure for temple worship. And we read here in chapter 21, verse 27, it says, when the 7 days were nearly over, this was the 7 days for the purification, it said some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help us. This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law in this place. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place." They had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with Paul and assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Okay, so a couple things have happened here. Number one, Paul's actually going through, and he actually has great reverence for the law. We know this. His entire life, and he's going to expound on this in a speech that we're going to talk about in a couple weeks. But his entire life has been around this central premise, which is the law. Right? His whole life he's spent looking at the law of God and understanding what the law of God is, and what he failed to understand, and it took Jesus showing up to him at the road of Damascus for him to finally understand, was that the law was not actually made for our salvation. See, the way I like to think of it is this, because people often say, we often talk about the law, and some Christians will go so far as to say that we don't need the law at all, right? Jesus fulfilled the law, therefore we don't need the law at all. And I say, no, the law is good. In fact, Paul never preaches against the law. Even this charge that's been brought against him, we don't actually see him do that. What we see happen is actually Paul went, wait a minute, we've misunderstood the law, much like Jesus did, by the way. Right? Jesus, too, also understood that the law needed to be fulfilled, not abolished. Because what was the law? The law was the revelation originally handed down from God to Moses that said, if you want to live in relationship with me, if you want to know what it takes in order to be good enough to be at my side, then fulfill my law. What did that reveal to us? Well, obviously we have a sacrificial system in the Old Testament, so what does that reveal? It revealed we couldn't do it. Every year, time and time again, at all the different festivals, at all the different times of the year, constantly, there were sacrifices at the temple. Why? Because we couldn't live up to it. We couldn't fulfill the law. We didn't fulfill it. And for the longest time, men like Paul and the other Jews around him that are seizing him in this moment, they too thought, and many still today, thought, yes, the law is there because we need to live it out in order that we be saved. Now, of course, what Paul ended up having revealed to him on the road to Damascus was, no, that's what Jesus did. Jesus was the fulfillment, and his blood, his innocent blood, sacrificed on the cross. is what saves us. That last sacrifice that ever was required. So, of course, we have, they're getting all riled up, and people, there's this big misunderstanding, much like how Paul misunderstood, much like how Paul once persecuted Christians, because he didn't understand what Jesus was teaching. He didn't understand what Jesus was saying when Jesus was walking around and teaching on earth. And if you're wondering when it says he brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place, I want us to understand that it's not that Greeks weren't allowed to come and worship. It's because if you were a convert to Judaism and you were Greek, there was a whole separate quarter. The temple compound was divided into separate quarters, and there was a women's quarter, and there was the Jewish men's quarter, and there was a Gentile quarter that allowed for Gentiles to come and worship God. Because no matter who you were allowed to come worship God if you wanted to offer worship to Yahweh, but you had to do it in a certain manner, in a certain way, right? It was very ritualistic. And what they're saying is, Paul, you broke the rules and you brought someone into a place in this temple where they weren't supposed to be. Now, this was a very, very big deal to the Jews. Very, very big deal. In fact, it often resulted in death because you would defile the Lord's temple. So when it says here in verse 30, the whole city was aroused and people came running from all directions, I don't think this is an exaggeration. This is what would get people's blood boiling. You did what to our Lord's temple? You defiled what God said. You took the words of the Lord and you said that they're nothing, right? Because remember, this is what the charge is. This isn't what Paul said. But this is what the charge is against him, that he preached against the law. So they seized Paul and they dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gates were shut. And it says, while they were trying to kill him, news reached the commander of the Roman troops that the whole city of Jerusalem was in an uproar. So he at once took some officers and soldiers. He ran down to the crowd. When the rioters saw the commander and soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Now, I don't know how long this beating went on, but let's face it, he was in the temple. He got dragged out, probably being beaten along the way. He's being dragged out into the city square, probably being beaten all the while. I don't know how long it took for the uproar to reach the commander's ears, for him to go grab his gear and get down to the square. But no matter what we do know is Paul had received quite a beating by this time. We've also talked about it before, about why would they suddenly stop beating Paul as soon as they saw the Romans? And that's because they knew the Romans were quite severe in their judgment. If there's one thing that Rome valued above all else, it was order and civility. You will be civilized, right? That was like their thing. They were going to go around and conquer the known world. They wanted to conquer everything so they could civilize it in their fashion. So when things got a little rambunctious, they didn't like it. And so when the Roman soldiers show up, gives everyone pause. Oh, what's going to happen? What's going to go on? Are we going to die? So they suddenly stop beating Paul. But the commander came up, he arrested him, that him being Paul, and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. Then he asked who he was and what he had done, and some in the crowd shouted one thing and some shouted another. And since the commander could not get at the truth because of the uproar, he ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. If any of you have ever seen a riot or been part of something where you're starting to feel it get off the rails, there's really like a feeling when you're in a crowd and you can realize like things aren't going to go well. Things are starting to go wrong. And when a riot does break out, when a mob mentality really starts to grab hold, when people are angry and confused, afraid, when they allow these things to enter into their heart and take over, truth doesn't matter. Right? We don't see this mob who hears this charge against Paul, this great, grave charge against Paul. Right? We don't see here once someone call for evidence. Someone call for proof. Hey, why don't you prove your claim? Why don't you show me the truth here? We don't see that. Why? Because they're angry and confused, and they just need to get it out. Truth doesn't matter. This primal emotion kicks in. And I thought, you know what? Because sometimes it can be confusing because, I feel like this wouldn't happen today, right? If we went, oh, someone defiled the church, we wouldn't have like a huge riot and people burning down like the city. But something I was thinking about is, especially that would make a crowd get real upset real quick. Something that more modern today. Can you imagine if someone said, hey, that guy's a pedophile and he was touching my child? That's going to get a crowd real riled up in a real hurry. Right? And so we can understand how quickly things can turn. Right? It was a totally normal day at the temple. Things were just going on. People were offering sacrifice. People were coming for cleansing. People were coming for prayer. People were coming for worship. They were coming for all sorts of things. And then suddenly, in a moment, everything changes. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I were Paul, I would be starting to wonder, what was this warning from the Holy Spirit? It's been nearly 7 days, and nothing's gone wrong. Maybe this warning I received from the Holy Spirit is actually for some future event that I don't yet know about. But then suddenly, as quick as anything, it switches, and everything gets bad. So the commander comes, he arrests him, and the commander, right, he's Roman, he's civilized. And he wants to get at the truth. Hey, what's going on here? You can't get it. People are yelling and screaming. People are getting more and more angry. And the reason I know that people are getting real angry is because we go from a group of people who have pause because the Roman soldiers show up to suddenly the Roman soldiers are having to retreat back to their barracks in order to try and get things figured out. Hey, what's going on? What is happening? Why are the people so upset? It says in verse 35, when Paul reached the steps, the violence of the mob was so great that he had to be carried by soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Get rid of him." This mob, this riot, was getting so out of hand that despite the presence of Roman soldiers, it could not be contained. Now, I don't know about you. I was thinking about this, and I was like, I don't know how many people have seen this movie. Has anyone here seen the movie RRR? Other than Rebecca. And I know you've seen it because you watched it with me. But it's about 19th century India when the British were occupying the land. And there's this wonderful scene at the beginning of the movie where this policeman, he's been given a task to go get this one rioter who threw something. But the mob is huge. There's thousands of people outside of the gates, and you see this tiny little police compound, and they got this fence, and everyone's all nervous because, oh my God, they're pressing in, and they're angry. They're real angry, and that's kind of what I imagine when I hear this, right? They're coming back into the barracks. They kind of get back to the Roman compound. They're still kind of trying to figure out what is going on. What has got these people so riled up? Like, let's face it, even when Jesus was being crucified, they weren't this rambunctious. So what is going on? What could cause them to be like this? That they would still be so violent despite the presence of Romans, which usually settled them. What is going on? So it says, as the soldiers were about to take Paul into the barracks, he asked the commander, "May I say something to you?" "Do you speak Greek?" he replied. "Aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out into the wilderness some time ago?" Things are getting so crazy. He's like, you must be this guy that everyone hates. Paul answered, I'm a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. Please let me speak to the people. And after he received the commander's permission, Paul stood on the steps, motioned to the crowd, and when they were all silent, he spoke to them in Aramaic. And we're going to get to Paul's speech next time in 2 weeks. But a couple big things happen here. Number one, he revealed he's a Jew. I'm one of them. Not only am I one of them, I'm a citizen. Remember, we talked about this before, how big a deal this is. I'm not just any old person. I'm a citizen of Rome. I am from Tarsus. I am a noteworthy individual. That's going to put some pause. Now remember, and I find that sometimes it can be so hard to understand this because we don't live this way anymore. We don't have this same setup in our society. But in a place where almost everyone was considered slave caste, especially the Jews did not rise above into the area of citizenship. In fact, many of the soldiers that are probably surrounding Paul in this moment, that are in that barracks, are serving the Roman Empire because they too want to earn their self-freedom and citizenship. That's what they want. What Paul has here is an incredible privilege that it does not exist for many people inside the Roman Empire. And I think if it wasn't for this, we wouldn't have seen the special treatment that Paul is getting from this particular commander. It's almost like God designed and set it all up exactly because he knew where Paul was going to be, what Paul was going to need to do, and who Paul, and the bravery that Paul was going to have. See, Paul was unafraid of these circumstances, and he was ready to face whatever lay before him. So what does all this mean? See, this was the very thing that Paul had been afraid of, that long journey from Greece through Macedonia, across Asia. All of that, the entire time, Paul was wrestling with his fear. Paul was wrestling with his conviction, but he made it, and he did it. Despite all the challenges that lay before him, despite all the difficulties, despite all the warnings that many other believers were giving him, praying to him, and saying, please, Paul, don't go to Jerusalem. He said, I need to go. The Lord is using me. See, the crowd intended to kill him right then and there. So I can't imagine how bad that beating was until that Roman commander arrived. In fact, maybe that's the very reason why the Roman soldiers had to carry him the last leg of the journey. He probably had received such a beating at that time, he probably couldn't even get away from the crowd quick enough. He was probably beaten so severely. Yet in the end, despite all of this, despite everything that had happened to Paul, despite trying to fulfill the law, despite going through the purity rites, despite living out the law and loving God and loving the law, the crowd came to kill him. And he knew that if he were to slink away now, if he were to hide away in the barracks and allow the crowd to dissipate, he knew that this would ultimately defeat the message that he had been trying to spread. He knew Paul had many violent interactions before in the past. He had been attacked many other times in the past, but these circumstances were different. This time, he is in the homeland. He is in the heart. He's at the temple. And if he's going to stand up for Jesus, he needs to be bold and he needs to be brave. He knows that he faces doom. Yet he's willing to do it anyway because this is the conviction of a man who loves Jesus Christ. He also recognized who he was talking to. This isn't Greeks. This isn't worshipers of pagan gods. This isn't some other far-off religious thing. This is his own people, the people who love God. And his heart breaks for them every time we read. Where does he do? He goes first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. Every time. Why? Because his heart breaks for them. These are his people. He loves them and he wants them to know the truth of Jesus Christ. He understands they're people of promise. They know the scriptures and they know better. But change, whether then or now, never comes easy. Change is difficult. Change can be painful. Change, it's never quickly accepted. See, there are moments in our lives, there are some moments that are real watershed moments. These moments will change absolutely everything about our life. These moments and these moments usually hang on a single decision. Many of us have probably had some sort of experience with this. How monumental this changed your life, only you can say. But all of us have had moments where we can look back and we say, this moment was big. This moment was really impactful. And by the way, we don't always make the right decisions in those moments, do we? That's the beauty, by the way, of serving Jesus Christ, repentance. We can turn back. We can go back to Christ and say, you know what, I messed up. I'm sorry. And it reminds me of some words that Jesus said, and we find them in Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. As I read this story, I'm reminded of this. This is from the Beatitudes. It says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Many of you have heard me talk about this before. What is the meek? Because often we think meek equals weak. Meek is not weak. Meek is strength tempered through wisdom. Meek is being strong, being powerful, being prepared, being ready, but knowing when the time is right and saying, you know what? Although I may be strong, although I may be powerful, might doesn't always make right. And you know what? I want to serve. Many times it's good and right to turn and walk away. We see this with Paul through all the rest of the book of Acts as we've been going. How many times has Paul been in the right to go back and have his accusers thrown in prison, have his accusers face justice, but he doesn't. Instead, he says, you know what? No. They don't know what they do. They're mistaken. They don't understand. And you know what? There's still hope for them. You don't pay violence for violence. But when it comes for standing up for the truth, when it comes for standing up for the truth of Jesus Christ, for what he represents, he is not the abolishment of the law. He is the fulfillment of it. He takes that law that says this is what is required in order that you be in the presence of God. And he says, and I filled it so that you too can be saved. I know you can't. I know you couldn't. But I love you so much that I wanted to make a way. This is the final thing that Paul is trying to get across to them. One last time. This is a worthy cause. This is a time where it is right to stand up, to face those that would attack you, and proclaim the truth of Jesus Christ. Paul endeavored to grow stronger and stronger, more and more powerful as he pursued his love of Christ, as he went from place to place preaching the gospel, as he went on his 3 missionary journeys. He just kept growing in strength, growing in power, growing in conviction, until all for this moment. So will we do that today? See, here's the thing. Paul didn't know when his moment would arrive. Neither do we. But all we can do is follow Paul's example and realize we need to grow in our conviction, grow in our power, grow in our strength. Be prepared, get ready, because one day Jesus will call on us to live boldly for the truth, just as he asked Paul. So are you going to grow meek, grow strong, temper it with wisdom, the wisdom of God? Do we want to grow like that for the Lord? Again, I can say it's a good thing, but each and every one of us has to make that decision for ourselves. Are you ready to do that today? Are you ready to make that proclamation?